Oh, God.
Sara,
Sim.
houve aqui um problema com o streaming, neste momento estamos ao vivo. E agora vamos deixar este... Ok, estava a ouvir em duplicado. Pronto, houve um problema com o streaming e neste momento estamos já a transmitir para o YouTube. Pronto, quando quiserem começar, podem começar.
E não vai conseguir tirar a parte inicial, não?
Vou fazer agora, sim.
Ah, certo. Então, podemos começar neste momento, é isso? Mas ainda não são 3 da tarde.
Não são 3, sim.
Daqui a 2 minutos, é isso?
Por nós, quando quiserem.
Mas quando começamos, começa na altura em que nós começamos, não fica a parte de trás, é isso?
Não, neste momento o streaming já está a ser transmitido. Nós depois, em pós-produção, vamos retirar este início que não faz sentido estar incluído, mas neste momento já estamos a transmitir e com os problemas que tivemos não vou estar a parar neste momento.
Está bem, certo.
Susana, tu tens o YouTube ligado para perceber as questões que estão a ser colocadas?
Não, mas... Tem. Não, assim, é que começa desde o início. Algum de vocês consegue... Bem, se calhar vamos então começar. Vamos então começar. Parece-vos bem? Dear researchers and colleagues, dear friends, welcome to this webinar on climate change and public health implications. My name is Susana Viegas, and I'm Assistant Professor of the Occupational and Environmental Health Department at National School of Public Health from Nova University of Lisbon. I will be the chair of this webinar that will have in total 3 panelists. Myself, I will do the introduction with a short presentation related with the mission of the Working Group Climate Change Impact on Public Health from Nova Health Strategic Areas. And in the end of this webinar, I will also present our ongoing project, Microclimate Change, Exposure to Mycotoxins in a Climate Change Scenario, funded by EEA grants, and thank you so much for the support, and with the University of Iceland as a distinguished partner. The second presentation will be performed by Professor Carla Viegas, researcher at Health and Technology Research Center and professor in Lisbon School of Health Technology from Polytechnic Institute of Lisbon. Professor Carla Viegas is an environmental mycologist dedicated to study environmental and occupational exposure to fungi and to estimate the implications for general population and workers' health. Professor Carol will present the topic Climate Change Influencing Fungi. The third presentation will be developed by Dr. Ricardo Assunção, researcher at Food and Nutrition Department from the National Institute of Health, Dr. Ricardo Jorge. Dr. Ricardo Assunção is a food scientist focusing his research in different aspects of food toxicology, risk and risk-benefit assessment of foods, with special emphasis for the impact of foods and diets on health. Dr. Ricardo will hold a presentation with the title Climate Change Influence in Human Exposure to Mycotoxins. This webinar is estimated to have a duration of 2 hours, being at the last 15 minutes dedicated to questions from the participants. And we will do our best to answer to your questions. So please use the Q&A space if you have it, or make your comments in the YouTube. And again, a special thanks to the funding agency, the AAA grants, that without their support, we were not able to start a partnership with Iceland University and develop this interesting research project. Thank you so much for that. So I will start presenting. The first presentation that is related with the mission of the working group Climate Change Impact on Public Health from Nova Health Strategic Areas. So the mission of this group is to increase awareness for the identification of climate change as responsible for several risk factors for human health. Also to recognize that the effects can be direct due to heat waves, floods, among others, and also indirect effects, which can result from changes in food security and safety, and or increased use of or exposure of chemical substance. So we have made a first attempt to claim attention for climate change and the impact that can have in public health. And we have also a link where you can see our initiatives in the scope of this group. We aim to promote synergies with the various national and international stakeholders that play a relevant role in the advance of scientific and technical knowledge in areas as a mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Also work together to prepare and submit research projects that contribute to a greater capacity of the country to anticipate and respond to the climate change scenario. And of course, promote interdisciplinary research aimed at preventing and minimizing the impact of climate change on human health. And of course, try to respond to some of the problems that climate change poses to public and occupational health service. Of course, we have a multidisciplinary team with different academic backgrounds, different experience, different knowledge to try to answer to these challenging moments, and also to give an answer to the service, to people working on health, on public health, on occupational health, and try to mitigate the impact that climate change can have in the health of population. So this was the mission of the working group. You can have a look in our webpage and try to see and identify some of the activities that we are developing, and contact us to work with us and collaborating with us. So the next presentation will be held by Carla Viegas. Carla, the floor is yours.
So, hi everyone. Thank you so much to have this opportunity to share my research interest. And today I'll be talking about climate change influence in fungi. So this is the outline of my presentation: climate change concerns and the hot topics that are problems to be solved, and critical fungal species regarding mycotoxins infection of the crops, azole pressure and toxigenic species, and also some take-home message about this presentation. So the International Panel on Climate Change and of course almost the entire scientific community already classified the Mediterranean area as one most susceptible to the global warming. And this is mainly due to heat waves that are defined as 5 or more consecutive days of heat reaching a daily maximum temperature of at least 5 Celsius degree higher than average maximum temperature. And this is, of course, increasing in Portugal as in other European countries. Agriculture constitutes one of the most sensitive sectors that could be affected by climate change. And among the contaminants that are infecting the crops, mycotoxins that are produced by fungi are the most challenging, since their presence can represent an economic burden and also health effects for animal and also human health. So many fungal plant pathogen species from Aspergillus and also from Fusarium genera can produce mycotoxins that are harmful to animal and also human health. And this is mainly due to their diversity and resilience to resist to different range of temperatures coming from -2 to 70 Celsius degrees. And of course, the climate change scenarios, among others, that can influence the crops. And of course, they can influence the fungi and then the mycotoxins production. So the expected climate change and the presence of certain toxigenic fungi and also mycotoxin in food and feed are of concern, great concern nowadays. And the predicted temperature increase will increase the Aspergillus section flavi among others, and consequently the aflatoxin B1 production. As you know, is a well-known carcinogenic mycotoxin. Additionally, some species will increase with climate change, and this will lead to a higher use of azole-based fungicides. These fungicides are the most used antifungals also in hospital environment to deal with Aspergillus infection, for instance, and their excessive and long-term use of azole fungicides in agriculture has led to an emergence of acquired azole resistance for some pathogenic fungi, and also trigger other potential pathogenic fungi for humans, such as Aspergillus fumigatus and their toxigenic potential. So as a sum up for the hot topics, we know that the climate change will be more critical in the Mediterranean area, mainly due to heat waves. This will increase some resilient fungal species, the ones that are thermotolerant, such as Aspergillus section 5, and this will, of course, increase the production of some mycotoxins, such as aflatoxin B1. And this, of course, this increase of fungi in crops will lead also to an increase of use of azole-based fungicides and the acquired fungi azole resistance among species. So regarding the critical fungal species, the climate change affects 3 important factors in crops: the environment, the plant host, and also the pathogens. So many plant diseases involve fungal pathogens, and many of these also have the potential to produce mycotoxins. So the climate change will influence the fungi and consequently will influence the mycotoxin production. Regarding Aspergillus section flavi, the predicted temperature will increase this specific section, and of course this also will contribute to an increase of aflatoxin B1. Several species of this section, the section flavi, are producers of aflatoxins, but Aspergillus flavus fungus is the most commonly associated with this with the aflatoxin production. Several strategies have already been proposed to deal with the aflatoxin problem in crops. The pre-harvest strategies that include the application of atoxigenic Aspergillus flavus strains, the use of other microbes as competitors, and good agricultural practice to avoid having moisture levels higher than 13%. So these are the main strategies that are being applied to avoid aflatoxin contamination in crops. So diverse population of Aspergillus flavus with varied degrees of atoxigenicity have been reported across tropical environment, but also in temperature regions, such as in Portugal and also in Italy. And in this map, you can see some concentration of mycotoxins already detected in samples. So high and low producers of aflatoxins among section Flavia have been isolated not only in Africa, but also in Europe, influencing mycotoxins prevalence in different geographic regions. So a recent warning for maize contamination was also performed in northern Italy. It was in 2012 and 2013, and this was mainly due to drought conditions that were favorable to Aspergillus flavus infection. And although preliminary results evidence the massive presence of toxigenic strains in the crops in Europe, there is a risk of shifting traditional occurrence due to increasing of average temperatures. So you can see in this figure that, for instance, Aspergillus flavus increased the development and growth until the 42 degrees. So we are expecting with the predicted climate scenario a boost of this fungus growth. So the ability of the fungi in general to colonize crops, survive, and produce toxins is affected by a range of environmental conditions that include temperature, rainfall, and also relative humidity. But abiotic stress, such as drought condition, can also promote the aflatoxins production. Another species complex that is also important in the climate scenario is Fusarium Ninaro species complex. And this species complex is a major threat to agricultural grain production and also for animal and human health. It consists of at least 16 species, and they are all able to incite the Fusarium red blight infection in crops. The severity of these disease epidemics and accumulation is associated with the mycotoxins production in wheat kernels and is strongly driven by meteorological factors. There are other Fusarium species complex, for instance, Comoro, Avnáceo, and Poe, that can be found also associated with this infection in some regions and especially across Europe. Also, it's important to highlight that the temperature, the range of temperature that can increase the fungal growth is not the same range that can boost the mycotoxins production. So it's important to have this characterization regarding each species complex. So they display a different optimal climate condition among species, among the same complex. And the Fusarium red blight epidemics caused by several species, and they are a result of accumulation of associated trichotocin mycotoxins and strongly weather dependent, and occur when viable airborne inoculum and warm wet weather coincide with a specific phase of the crop. As in other crops contamination, they are dependent of the triangle that I already mentioned. So this extreme weather conditions can of course, can create favorable conditions for this infection. And for instance, available data indicate that wheat may be more susceptible to Fusarium under the future climatic scenarios. So, due to the close association with favorable weather conditions, disease or mycotoxin risk or intensity can be predicted using forecasting models, using within season weather, around flowering, and also combining with agronomic factors. So you can see here an example in this figure that is the regional weather-based infection risk displayed on a map of Switzerland. So you can see, having all this information regarding weather condition and also agronomic factors and the time of the crops, we can have this risk map. So in most of the study targeting specific location or geographic regions such as UK, China, Brazil, and Argentina, Fusarium head blight incidence is predicted to increase, mainly due to warmer temperatures. And in contrast, the same infection in crops is predicted to decrease in Scotland, where early flowering coincides with projected drier conditions. Again, very dependent of the weather conditions and also of the crop time. So other topic that I mentioned in the outline is the azole pressure and toxigenic species. So medic-azole antifungals are major compounds used to prevent and to treat infection disease, fungal disease, sorry, and the one that is more focused is, of course, invasive aspergillosis. They are called DMI and are widely used for crop protection and have been reported to be linked to azole-resistant aspergillus fumigators developed in the environment. So this is due because fungi are remarkable in their ability to adapt rapidly in response to selective pressures, and maybe their capacity for both sexual and asexual reproduction, and their capacity to tolerate changes in the environment can boost this capacity of adapt. So in clinical and in agricultural settings, these properties translate to an ability to really develop resistance to antifungal agents. We can see here that from recent years, researchers are being more focused not only in clinical samples, but also environmental samples. And we have here several environmental samples coming mainly from crops, where they were screened for azole resistance in fungi. Also, a previous study performed by our team identified Aspergillus fumigatus resistant strains in sawmills in Norway. And this is because in this industry, the wood needs to be treated with fungicides, and this pressure can cause the resistant in the Aspergillus fumigatus strains. We also propose an algorithm to assess and to identify these resistant strains among Aspergillus section fumigati. So as I can wrap up this topic, is that climate change will increase fungi and mycotoxins contamination. This is mainly due to intensive use of azoles in crops to avoid toxigenic species that can lead to resistant species that can multiply and survive, such as Aspergillus fumigatus, leading to infections that are hard to treat and life-threatening. So as a take-home message to this communication, I want to highlight that climate change can trigger toxigenic fungi infection that can lead to human exposure to mycotoxins, and an increase of azole-resistant fungi, and of course, life-threatening infection for humans. So thank you for your attention. I'll be available for questions.
Thank you, Carla, for your excellent presentation. Now, Dr. Ricardo will perform his presentation. Thank you, Ricardo. The floor is yours.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Susanna, for the nice introduction. I would like to say thanks also to the EEA grants for to support these webinar, and also to all that are following us via YouTube. So the title of my presentation today is Climate Change Influence in Human Exposure to Mycotoxins. And I will focus some issues regarding this topic. So I will focus the interaction between climate change and mycotoxins, also the public health implications of human exposure to mycotoxins, and the future perspectives, putting some issues and some aspects to the discussion. So as referred previously, so the climate change is unequivocal and will affect the atmosphere, the ocean, the level of sea. So there are some consequences of climate change. And one of these consequences is the impact at different levels in different continents, affecting different systems. In this picture, we could see that different continents could be affected in a different way, but mainly the systems that are affected by climate change include the physical systems, including or affecting the glaciers, the snow, the rivers, or the sea level, the biological systems affecting the terrestrial ecosystem, the wildfire, the marine ecosystems, but also the human and managed systems like the food production and livelihood, health, and economics. So focusing the food, in fact, climate change affects, or as a consequence, in biological systems, affecting the factors, biotic and abiotic factors. And these will impact the food and agriculture systems in two different arms. In one hand, they affect the food security, meaning the access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. And in the other hand, they could impact the food safety, meaning affecting the safety of the foods that are consumed. And these two arms will impact the public health. In fact, food safety was already identified some factors that affect the safety of foods, including the agricultural practices, the technological development, the socioeconomic, global trade, but also climate. Climate change could modify the nature and the occurrence of some food safety hazards. And how these climate change could affect food safety for different reasons, affecting the temperature and the precipitation patterns, increasing the frequency and the intensity of extreme weather events, as Carla referred before, and also changes in the transport of complex contaminants. And as Carla referred before, the heat waves are more and more frequent in Europe, and it is easy to remember all the heat waves from the last years. So climate change could affect food safety in different ways. In one hand, they could affect the occurrence of foodborne disease agents and also some zoonoses and animal diseases. And these two aspects are interconnected since some of these foodborne disease agents are zoonotic agents. So these two topics are interconnected. And the third one is the toxicogenetic fungi and mycotoxin contamination. And Carla also referred it briefly before. So I will detail a bit in this topic. So what are mycotoxins? So mycotoxins are naturally occurring contaminants produced by fungi that could produce adverse health outcomes when consumed by humans and animals. And this exposure could occur directly through the consumption of cereal-based products, for example, or indirectly through the consumption of animal products like milk. But one thing is common: the food and feed are the considered main exposure sources. And Carlo also referred this, that the environment conditions will affect the growth of some mycotoxigenic fungi. Temperature, water activity, drought, and pluvial precipitation are important factors that could affect the environment of the mycotoxigenic fungi and affecting their growth, and consequently the production of mycotoxins. And regarding these, one important question is, are the temperatures associated to these heat waves and these signs of some climate change or quite different from those that we are used to? In this table, we could see the different mycotoxins and the associated fungi that produce these mycotoxins. And as we could see here, the temperatures associated to the production of mycotoxins are not so different from those that we are used to. So one additional question that we could pose is the fact that what are the current exposure to mycotoxins? And according to this HASF, so the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed, the EU notifications showed that in 2018, the last data available revealed that mycotoxins was the second hazard that motivated these notifications concerning food and feed. But if we focus just in food, mycotoxins led these notifications, and the associated food products include the nuts, the fruit and vegetables, the herbs and spices, and also some cereal-based products. But if we think about the different types of mycotoxins, there are a lot of different types of mycotoxins. Aflatoxins and ochratoxin A led these notifications. So, concerning aflatoxins, so aflatoxins are the highest acute and chronic toxicity, or present the highest acute and chronic toxicity of all mycotoxins, and they produce hepatotoxicity, teratogenicity, and immunotoxicity, and occur in different food products like cereals, oilseeds, spices, and nuts. And one of the main important aspects associated to aflatoxins concerns the development of liver cancer. In fact, aflatoxins is a significant risk factor to the liver cancer. And the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified the aflatoxins as a group 1, meaning that they are human carcinogens. So regarding climate change and aflatoxins, as referred, it is expected that climate change could assume or could impact the mycotoxins in food. But in the past, it was considered that in Europe, aflatoxins were not mentioned as a matter of concern. However, associated to this climate change, in the future, it is expected that aflatoxins contamination constitute an important aspect in terms of food safety in Europe. And this picture could show these results. So in this picture, we could see the present situation, +2 degrees scenario and a +5 degrees scenario regarding the risk of contamination by aflatoxin B1. So as we could see, it is as far as or as much red in the graph represents higher risk of contamination, meaning that the south of Europe, mainly Iberian Peninsula, Italy, and Greece, will be particularly affected if we are considering a +2 degrees of climate change scenario in terms of temperature, of course. But there are other mycotoxins. As I referred before, there are more than 500 different mycotoxins. And I selected here some mycotoxins that present some concern in terms of public health, or main concern, namely ochratoxin A, fumonisin, and deoxynivalenol. And the associated health effects are, for ochratoxin A, the renal cancer and the Balkan endemic nephropathy. For the fumonisins, the esophageal cancer and the neural tube defects. And for the deoxynivalenol, with the target of the gastrointestinal system, and also the impairment of growth. So there are different health effects that could be associated to these different mycotoxins, and if they will be affected or impacted by the climate change, these health effects should be considered. So this is the current situation, and what about the human exposure to these mycotoxins and the associated risk? In the last report from EFSA regarding the risk assessment of aflatoxins in food, one important thing to highlight is the fact that toddlers, other children, and adolescents are the group of the population that are highly exposed to aflatoxins through diet. And this corresponds also, this is similar in when we talk about risk. So these population groups are especially affected or in risk regarding aflatoxins exposure. And regarding ochratoxin A, also from the risk assessment from EFSA, also these groups of the population, so toddlers, other children, and adolescents, are especially presenting higher exposure to ochratoxin A, and this is reflected also in the risk of these population groups and the risk associated to this exposure. So these data reflect the current human exposure and how will be the human exposure in the future, and are we ready to face this challenge? So now we can anticipate that human exposure to mycotoxins will occur or will increase in the future. And these will correspond to the occurrence in the food chain and also in the type and the type of commodities that will be affected. So, okay, we could introduce some different choices regarding in order to avoid the exposure to mycotoxins in the future. However, it is also anticipated that some difficulties are expected, since it is not easy to change so much the dietary preferences due to, of course, the public preferences regarding some specific foods. There are another issue is the seasonal variation of the performance of the crops. So this could lead to the fact that new weather patterns could motivate some threats to the food security, because these new weather patterns could impact the performance of the crops, and these could compromise the access to food and consequently impact the public health. Another issue is the fact that it is possible to occur some changes in the geographical range of crops produced. And this corresponds to an opportunity to new fungus to occur. And it is important to refer that nowadays there are some mycotoxins, some compounds that were not present, or that they didn't present so much risk in the past, but nowadays they are considered emergent mycotoxins, precisely because they are becoming more important and more frequent in terms of occurrence. So to the question, are we ready? We could say yes, because we are ready to anticipate the potential risks and the health impact. But in the other hand, we could say no, because we are not facing this issue as an imminent, unequivocal, and real risk. And in fact, mycotoxins are a real problem, because not due to the fact that we don't know what strategies we could implement, but the problem is how these strategies could be implemented. And an important issue is the fact that the main concern associated to mycotoxins is the fact that they promote a chronic exposure. And this chronic exposure is difficult to motivate an action by the politics, because they consider this as a theoretical risk. So the governments, industry, and consumers should be more sensible to this topic, and an intensification of the efforts to implement programs on food safety management should be implemented in order to recognize, understand, and prepare for the impact of climate change. So some strategies and some ideas to think about. The first one is the fact that we should prevent the contamination of mycotoxins. However, we should take into account that mycotoxins are natural contaminants. So the complete prevention is not feasible. So what we could do is to prevent that the levels increase to levels that could cause harm. So we should prevent this. The second issue is regards the surveillance and monitoring of humans, animals, food, and environment. So we should promote this monitoring process, continuous monitoring process, in order to anticipate and prevent potential health consequences of high contamination. Another important issue is this predictive modeling. So predictive modeling are mathematical models that could be used as a tools combining different data to predict mycotoxins outbreaks. They generate information that are crucial to anticipate the potential contamination levels and, of course, to prevent health consequences. An important issue regarding the predictive modeling is the fact that farmers could also use these predictive tools in order to implement some mitigation strategies in order to avoid high levels of contamination. Another issue is the fact that the storage in terms of mycotoxins is super important, because if the fungus will find some environmental conditions during storage to produce mycotoxins, these in one hand could produce food loss and contributing to the food insecurity. And in another hand, they could also introduce some levels that could be combining different food products could be dangerous for humans. So the storage is very, very important. Another issue, good agricultural practices. So introduce some measures, understand the problematic, and try to manage the risk in a very comprehensive way. Another issue is the public consumers information. So as I referred before, mycotoxins are usually not understood as by the public as a threat, because they don't understand very well what are mycotoxins and the possible consequences. So a significant effort should be implemented in order to inform public about the risk and also the food commodities that are usually associated to higher risk. And another issue is the investment in scientific and technical capacities. A good example is the EEA grants, as we could see by this webinar and this project, that promote the better understanding of the problems. So these could be implemented through the development and implementation of strategies addressing the risks associated to climate change. And another issue is the fact that a paradigm change is necessary. In fact, if we are talking just that climate change threatens our existence, perhaps we'll not receive the best attention. But perhaps if we associate the economy, we will find that more and more people will be aware about this, and this will be important to motivate for action. And finally, I hope that we don't need centuries to realize that impact climate change on the planet and consequently on health, will be, so my hope is that we don't need to wait centuries to realize this, and we really face that the climate change is occurring right now and has consequences for different systems, including for health. Finally, I would like to thanks again to the EEA grants, to the partner, the University of Iceland, to CISP for the organization, and also for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ricardo, for the excellent presentation. Very nice indeed. And I think both presentations describe well why is so important our study and our collaboration with the University of Iceland. So let me now start a short presentation of our project, the scope, the aim, and the objectives. So this is our project. As you can see, is dedicated to the influence that climate change can have in exposure to mycotoxins. Our aim is to contribute to identify the influence that climate change can have on human exposure to mycotoxins, considering the different climate change scenarios expected for European continents. We will develop several activities. One of those activities is to collect biological samples from Iceland population to measure mycotoxins, and also to consider the data already published describing the exposure to mycotoxins in Portuguese population. With this, we aim to achieve several objectives: to identify most relevant exposure sources in both countries, to estimate the health effects that can be expected due to exposure. Also to evaluate the risk for the actual exposure scenario and for the expected climate change scenario. Of course, develop effective communication activities like this one and actions that target the proper audience to maximize the impact of the project. And of course, contribute for the promotion of public health measures to reduce mycotoxin exposure in Europe. So this project is possible with the support of EE grants, also with our partner, the University of Iceland. So we think that the next presentation that will be prepared by us, and maybe by this way, webinar, it will be to present some of our results. We expect that this will be the future. So please, we are now waiting from some comments and questions from your side. I think for now there are no questions or comments until now. We have some participants. I hope that you have enjoyed our webinar. We intend to prepare additional webinars, and as I mentioned before, with some of the results of our project. We also have a page in the webpage of Public Health Faculty from Nova University of Lisbon, in Portuguese, Escola Nacional de Saúde Pública da Universidade Nova de Lisboa, dedicated to this project, where you can see some of the papers and some of our work that will be produced in the scope of this project. So stay tuned. We can wait for maybe more 5 minutes. I don't know if Ricardo and Carla want to comment something or add something to their presentations, please, if you want.
I can just briefly refer these aspects that I ended with, the fact that I think that the public are not so aware about this topic about mycotoxins. Even when we talk about the impact of climate change in food safety, the main issues usually associated with are the pathogens and the zoonoses. And these chemical components like the mycotoxins are not so well understood under these contexts. So I think that there is a room to improve these communication strategies, to make this topic more in the topics, to be discussed with the different stakeholders, with the consumers, but also with the health authorities, the food safety authorities, in order to improve these aware. Because especially in the peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, in Portugal and Spain, it is expected a particular impact of these climate change in terms of impact on fungi and consequently on mycotoxin contamination of foods. So I think that there are some, there is a room to improve these and to motivate to implement some strategies.
Thank you, Ricardo. Carlo, do you want to add something?
I think the question that Ricardo focuses is the same when we are talking about occupational environments. I mentioned in the presentation regarding sawmills, and this is only an example. If you want other occupational environments that are also related with food commodities, like with the vineyards in Portugal, and also the cork industry are also very stressful with azole-based fungicides. And probably they will be also facing a problem not only with the use of fungicides, with DMIs, but also the fungi with resistance to these fungicides. And the increase of fungi in these raw materials in this industry that are the grapes and also the cork can lead to the need of increase the treatment. So we are facing a public health problem, not only in food safety, but also in an occupational exposure and of course in public health menace, I think.
Indeed, the climate change scenario also boosts the use of fungicides and other biocides just to help to deal with the crops and to avoid their contamination with fungi and other microbiomes. And so I think we still don't have comments or questions. So some last words in this webinar. I have to thank you to my both colleagues for the excellent presentations that they prepared. They were very useful, and I think they bring a lot of knowledge and also the background needed to understand the importance of our project. And I think we will have interesting data that for sure should be useful for health authorities, food safety authorities in both countries, Portugal and Iceland, but also to bring and to be used as an example of the work that we should do together to have meaningful results and to give information for decision and to help authorities to make the smart decisions and needed decisions to avoid human exposure. So maybe we can end this webinar and say you goodbye, and please keep in contact. Have a look in our webpage related with the project and also related with the group that we have in Nova University. And thank you so much to attend this webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you.